What happened when an undercover CEO walked into one of his own cozy bookstore cafes, disguised as just another barista he expected to observe operations? But instead, he uncovered exhaustion, mistreatment, and a heartbreaking confession from a young employee that would change everything. Hello to all our incredible listeners. You always know how to pick a story that matters. In Beneath the Roasts and Pages, you'll follow a CEO's journey from silent observer to active reformer, as he rediscovers the soul of his company through the eyes of the people holding it together. Stay tuned. This story might just change how you see leadership. The rain tapped gently on the sidewalk as Julian Moreau stood across the street from the Lit Latte Café in downtown Seattle. He looked nothing like the polished CEO gracing business magazines. Gone were the tailored suits and signature horn-rimmed glasses. Today he wore a thrifted hoodie, faded jeans, and a name tag that read Jules. It had been years since Julian had stepped foot inside one of his own stores unannounced. He had built Lit Latte from a single cozy bookshop into a national chain, blending literary charm with artisanal coffee. But lately something felt off. Customer reviews mentioned cold service, employee feedback was growing silent, and turnover had increased across multiple locations. One store in particular, the original Seattle branch, had caught his attention. Today, he would find out why. Julian pushed open the glass door, instantly greeted by the rich scent of espresso and old paper. The cafe looked just as he remembered: mossy green walls, handwritten book recommendations, and soft indie music playing overhead. But the vibe was different. The staff behind the counter moved quickly but without spark. A tired young barista called out orders with mechanical rhythm, while the shift lead gave terse instructions without looking up. No one asked for his name. No one smiled. A manager appeared from the back, clipboard in hand. "You the new guy?" she asked, glancing at his name tag. Julian nodded. "Great, we're short today, so jump on a dish or milk prep." She didn't wait for confirmation before disappearing again. Julian set his bag down and slipped behind the counter, unnoticed by customers and staff alike. As he washed pitchers and watched the rush unfold, he quietly observed every detail: the clipped tones, the missed breaks, the hollow eyes. This wasn't just a busy shift. This was burnout. And somewhere, behind the espresso machines and dusty bookshelves, the story he came for was waiting, one that had nothing to do with coffee and everything to do with people. Julian's second hour behind the counter gave him his first real glimpse into the heartbeat of the store, and it wore a name tag that read, Maya. She looked to be in her early 20s, with curly brown hair tied up in a messy bun, and a faded Lit Latte apron cinched tightly at the waist. Her smile came easily to customers, warm and practiced, but Julian quickly noticed the cracks. Between transactions, her eyes darted toward the clock, her shoulders sagged the moment no one was watching, and her jaw clenched each time a new order popped up on the screen. There was something heavy behind her eyes, something that didn't belong in a place meant to nourish community and creativity. He watched her greet each customer with genuine kindness, even as exhaustion tugged at her posture. A middle-aged woman asked for help finding a poetry book, and Maya lit up for a brief moment, rattling off a recommendation with such enthusiasm that Julian nearly forgot what he was there for. But as soon as the customer left, that spark vanished. She rubbed the back of her neck, winced, and reached into her pocket for a small pill bottle. She swallowed quickly and went back to work. Julian found himself silently stepping in when he could, resetting milk jugs, clearing used mugs, wiping counters. To lighten her load without drawing attention, Maya barely acknowledged him beyond a polite thank you, too focused on staying afloat. At one point she dropped a spoon and quickly apologized to no one in particular. Julian picked it up, handed it to her, and said softly, "You okay?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Just tired," she said, flashing a hollow smile. "Been a long week." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, and before he could say anything else, she turned back to the espresso machine. Julian stepped away, pretending to clean nearby, but his thoughts stayed on her. This wasn't just about a bad shift. Maya looked like someone who had been carrying too much for far too long. And as Julian watched her struggle to keep her composure through another rush of orders, he felt the early flicker of what he hadn't felt in years, the weight of responsibility, not as a CEO, but as a human being who had the power to change something. And he knew this, whatever Maya was holding inside, it was where the real story began. By his third shift, Julian had become more than just a silent observer. He was part of the machinery. From the prep sink to the espresso bar, he blended in easily, unnoticed by customers and barely acknowledged by the team. But it was this invisibility that allowed him to see what truly simmered beneath the polished menu boards and indie playlists. The staff wasn't just tired, they were stretched beyond reason. Orders piled up faster than they could be filled, and breaks were either delayed or skipped entirely. He saw Maya glance longingly at the back hallway multiple times before finally sneaking a sip of water between rushes. The shift supervisor Darren barked commands with the sharp edge of someone who had once cared but now operated on autopilot. "Maya, table 7's still a mess. Jules, you missed a spot on the fridge door." Every directive came clipped, never with gratitude. Julian didn't mind the corrections. He wanted to see what it felt like. But what he noticed most was how rarely anyone said thank you or even addressed each other by name. It was transactional, robotic. In the quiet moments between coffee rushes, the silence among the team was loud. No jokes, no banter, no relief. Julian once tried asking a fellow barista, Erin, how long she'd worked there. She blinked, hesitated, and muttered, "Too long," before walking off. Later, he caught Maya sneaking into the supply closet. She didn't see him. She leaned against the wall and exhaled deeply, massaging her temples. Julian lingered just long enough to see her pull out a granola bar from her apron pocket and eat in silence, staring at the floor like it was the only safe place in the world. The realization hit him harder than expected. Lit and Latte had once prided itself on being a haven, not just for customers, but for staff. Now, behind the friendly branding, the workers were crumbling, and no one at the top knew. Or worse, maybe they did and chose to ignore it. Either way, Julian now had faces to go with the reports, names behind the numbers. And Maya, more than anyone, reminded him that something was broken, something that desperately needed fixing. It was near the end of a particularly grueling Friday shift when Julian noticed Maya slip away toward the back. The espresso machine hissed, the floor was sticky with spilled oat milk, and Darren was loudly berating another barista for an inventory error. Julian, elbows deep in sanitizer solution at the dish pit, saw Maya disappear into the break room with her shoulders hunched. A moment later, he heard, barely audible over the clinking cups and steam, the muffled sound of crying. Without thinking, Julian removed his gloves and followed. The break room door was cracked open just enough for him to see her sitting on a crate in the corner, back turned, hands over her face. "I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this," she whispered through tears. "My rent's late again. They cut my hours, and I'm already working nights at Brew Nation just to get by." Her voice broke. "I'm so tired. I just need one thing to go right." Julian's breath caught in his throat. She wasn't venting to anyone. She was talking to herself, crumbling in solitude. The sight struck him harder than any financial report ever had. He gently pushed the door open, pretending to be confused. "Oh, sorry," he said quietly. "Didn't mean to barge in. I was looking for the restroom." Maya quickly wiped her eyes and forced a tight smile. "It's fine," she murmured. "Down the hall to the left." Julian didn't leave. Instead, he took a slow step inside. "You okay? You looked upset earlier. I can listen if you want." Her guard wavered. For a long second, she studied his face, then sighed. "It's just life, I guess. Rent, bills, broken car, and now fewer hours here. I feel like I'm always on the edge of drowning." Julian nodded, heart aching. "That's a lot. I'm sorry you're dealing with all of it." Maya gave a sad laugh. "Thanks. Most people just say tough luck and move on." Julian didn't respond right away. Instead, he just sat beside her in the crate and let the silence settle. In that small, quiet room behind a bustling cafe, the reality of her world was clearer than ever. She wasn't asking for sympathy, just to be seen. And as Julian looked at her, truly looked, he realized this moment was why he came. Not for a mystery to solve, but for a truth to face. Julian returned to Lit Latte headquarters the next morning before sunrise. Gone was the worn hoodie and barista apron. He wore a charcoal gray suit, tailored and sharp, though his face carried the weight of everything he'd witnessed. The contrast between the Seattle Café and corporate HQ couldn't have been more jarring. Sleek glass walls, polished wood floors, a minimalist espresso bar in the lobby. It all exuded success, professionalism, and detachment. As he passed by employees holding lattes worth half a shift's wage, Julian felt something curdle in his chest. He strode into his corner office, overlooking the Sound, and immediately called in Naomi Fields, his longtime executive assistant. "I need the last 6 months of labor reports," he said. "Hourly reductions, wage adjustments, everything." Naomi blinked, surprised by his tone. "Yes, of course. Do you want me to loop in Colin?" Julian shook his head. "Not yet." Within the hour, reports lined his desk. Spreadsheets with surgical reductions in labor hours, precise to the decimal. Most stores had seen staffing cuts despite increased sales. His fingers tightened around the paper. This wasn't streamlining, it was exploitation. He scanned for the authorizing signature on a policy labeled Efficiency Rollout Phase 2C. Drake, Colin. Julian summoned Colin Drake, the CFO, to his office. The man entered with his usual breezy confidence. "What's up?" he asked, adjusting his cufflinks. "Why are stores cutting hours during record revenue periods?" Julian asked, blunt. Colin shrugged. "It's basic ops, less staff, more efficiency, numbers don't lie." Julian stared at him. "But people do. You're driving employees into the ground for short-term margin gains." Colin smirked, tone shifting. "Julian, you've been in the clouds too long. This is business. We can't coddle part-timers." Julian stood slowly, voice low and steady. "They're not part-timers, they're people, and you just confirmed everything I needed to know." Colin's expression faltered. "We're done here," Julian said. "An audit's coming, and if there's anything else I find under your name, you'll answer for it." As Colin left, Julian turned back toward the window, the skyline glittering beyond, but it didn't impress him anymore. Not when he knew how many people it had cost to build, and how many were quietly paying the price. The executive boardroom at Lit Latte was a sleek, soundproof chamber of power. Abstract art adorned the walls, and a panoramic view of Seattle stretched behind Julian as he stood at the head of the long walnut table. The 12 board members, executives, advisors, and senior partners, sat in silence as he laid a thick folder of documents before him. His voice, though calm, carried unmistakable weight. "Thank you all for being here on short notice. What I'm about to share affects not just our bottom line, but our identity." He began with the facts: unexplained labor cuts, increased turnover, declining employee morale, and financial inconsistencies. He walked them through the numbers Naomi had compiled and read excerpts from anonymous staff complaints. But then Julian paused. "Let me tell you about someone named Maya," he said. "She's a barista at our 5th and Pine location. She's been working here for over 2 years. Her hours were slashed. She's barely affording rent. She's juggling 2 jobs and breaking down in our break room." Murmurs spread around the table. A few board members shifted uncomfortably. Julian continued, "She thinks corporations don't care. And until this week, she was right." He let the words settle, then looked each person in the eye. "I went undercover to see what was happening in our stores. What I saw was exhaustion, fear, people being treated like liabilities instead of the lifeblood of this company." Colin Drake, seated near the end of the table, stiffened. Julian turned to him. Colin approved labor cutbacks during periods of record profit, maximizing margins while pushing employees past their limits. He held up a document. "And I have reason to believe that's not the only thing Colin manipulated." Colin stood abruptly. "You can't pin this all on me. This is a business, Julian, not a charity." Julian's tone dropped to ice. "And I didn't build this business on cruelty." Turning back to the board, he announced, "Effective immediately, Colin is suspended pending a full audit. We're reversing labor cuts, increasing base pay, and implementing real wellness support for our staff." He took a breath. "This company was born in a bookstore, built by people who cared, and it will not become another machine that grinds down the ones who keep it running." For the first time in years, the boardroom didn't feel like a tower, it felt like a reckoning. 3 days after the boardroom reveal, Naomi stepped into Julian's office, her expression pale and tight, a folder clutched in her hands. "You need to see this," she said quietly. Julian took the folder and opened it slowly, scanning the contents. What he found made his stomach turn. The audit had revealed a trail of misappropriated funds, bonuses, inflated vendor contracts, and shell payouts masked under the guise of efficiency initiatives. Every trail pointed back to one name: Colin Drake. Julian leaned back in his chair, stunned. The betrayal was deeper than poor management. It was deliberate manipulation. Bleeding money from the company while blaming budget shortfalls for staffing cuts. Colin had sold himself as a cost-cutting genius, and Julian, lost in quarterly growth and expansion plans, had believed him. Now the true cost was clear. Employees like Maya were suffering, while Colin padded his pockets. He called Colin to his office immediately. When the CFO entered, Julian didn't waste time. "You've been siphoning money through shell vendors," he said coldly. Colin didn't deny it. "I did what I had to do to keep this company competitive," he said. "You were too busy playing visionary to see the real numbers." Julian stood. "You stole from the people who built this brand, and you blamed them for not being efficient enough." His voice didn't rise, but it didn't need to. "You're fired. Legal will be in touch." Colin's smirk faltered for the first time. "You think firing me fixes this?" he spat. "You're going to burn millions trying to play hero." Julian didn't blink. "Then let it burn. If that's the cost of doing the right thing, I'll pay it." Colin stormed out, and Julian turned back to the window, the city stretching before him. This wasn't just about money. It was about trust. Broken, but not beyond repair. And he was ready to start stitching it back together. When Julian stepped back into the Lit Latte on 5th and Pine, he wasn't wearing a hoodie or an apron. This time he arrived in a simple, open-collared shirt, no blazer, no entourage. The moment the door chimed, a few employees looked up from the counter and froze. Recognition flashed across their faces. Maya, midway through steaming oat milk, nearly dropped the pitcher. She blinked, then whispered to the barista next to her, "That's him! That's Julian Moreau!" Julian offered a small wave, then approached the counter. "Hey," he said, his voice gentle. "Would it be all right if we talked for a minute?" Maya hesitated, then nodded slowly, handing off her station before following him to the reading nook in the back. They sat in two soft chairs between poetry shelves, the tension in her posture evident. "I wanted to thank you," Julian began. "What you shared with me, before you knew who I was, it changed everything." Maya looked at him carefully. "Is it true? What they're saying? About raises, about hours being restored?" Julian nodded. "Yes, effective immediately. Pay increases are rolling out, breaks will be enforced, and new leadership training is being implemented company-widely. It won't all happen overnight, but this store will be the first to feel the difference." Maya's eyes welled with tears, but she quickly blinked them away. "I didn't think anyone at the top would ever care. We've been screaming into the void for so long, we stopped expecting echoes." Julian leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I built this place to feel like home, for both the customers and the people who keep it running. Somewhere along the way, I lost sight of that. You reminded me why it matters." For the first time, Maya smiled, a real, unguarded smile. "Well," she said, voice steadier, "then I guess we start again." Julian stood and offered his hand. Together. As he walked back toward the counter, the rest of the staff watched him with cautious curiosity. They weren't cheering, not yet, but their eyes held something new, possibility. And for Julian, that was enough to begin. Over the next month, Julian Moreau traded boardrooms for break rooms. He traveled from Seattle to San Diego, Minneapolis to Miami, visiting Lit and Latte locations, not as a CEO looking to make a speech, but as a listener, ready to learn. At every stop, he sat with staff during their breaks, took notes in spiral-bound notebooks, and asked one question over and over. What do you need to feel valued here? The answers varied: fairer scheduling, better mental health support, opportunities to move up. But the core message was the same. We want to be seen. Back at headquarters, Julian and Naomi rolled out sweeping reforms. Anonymous feedback portals, regional employee councils, flexible scheduling pilots, and wellness stipends became company policy. They launched an internal storytelling campaign called Real Voices, Real People, spotlighting staff across the country, baristas, cleaners, bakers, sharing their stories on the company's app, website, and even packaging. Instead of polished ad slogans, customers now read lines like, "I saved up for my daughter's first guitar stringing lattes at our Denver shop. Carlos, shift lead." Julian didn't just want to fix a broken system, he wanted to rewrite its core. Public trust began to recover, not through spin, but sincerity. And within the company, something subtle and powerful was growing. A culture that no longer whispered, "We're replaceable," but one that declared, with quiet certainty, "We matter." A few weeks later, Julian returned to the Fifth and Pine store, not for an inspection, not for a speech, but just to be present. The energy in the cafe had shifted. The playlist still hummed softly overhead, the espresso still steamed, and books still lined every shelf. But now, laughter trickled from the back, conversations bloomed behind the counter, and the weight in the air had lifted. Julian stepped in quietly, grabbed an apron from the hook, and joined the morning prep team without a word. Maya, now wearing a new name tag that read Assistant Manager, spotted him rinsing milk pitchers. She smirked and crossed her arms. "Didn't think you'd actually come back," she teased. Julian grinned. "Told you, starting over means showing up." They worked side by side through the morning rush, and this time, Maya didn't look over her shoulder with worry. She led with confidence, calm, and the kind of quiet authority born from someone who'd finally been trusted. As the last cappuccino of the rush was handed off, Julian stepped aside, wiping his hands. He looked around, not at profits or charts, but at people. Real people, thriving. The kind of workplace he had always dreamed of building. Maya joined him at the front window. "Feels different now," she said. Julian nodded. "Because it is." And for the first time in a long time, he believed it. This story teaches us that leadership isn't about titles or boardrooms. It's about connection, empathy, and accountability. Julian Moreau built Lit Latte with passion, but over time he drifted from the people who made that vision real. By going undercover, he didn't just observe poor conditions, he felt the weight of them. Maya's quiet struggle became the voice of countless employees who had been overlooked and undervalued. The real turning point wasn't a policy shift or a press conference. It was the moment Julian chose to listen, to show up, and to act. The story reminds us that no business can thrive if its people are running on empty. True culture change happens when leaders are willing to step down from their pedestals and walk beside their teams. It's about creating workplaces where honesty is welcomed, dignity is protected, and growth is shared. Beneath the roast and pages isn't just about fixing a broken system. It's about rebuilding trust, one human interaction at a time.